Want to get a peek at all the little choices and strategic discussions that go into creating and launching a successful podcast? You're in the right place, because Podetize co-founders Tracy Hazzard and Tom Hazzard have launched and hosted 6 shows of their own and advised 600 other podcasters on setting up their show for success. Drop in behind the scenes while they design their latest show, The Next Little Thing.
Hey, Tom, today I thought we'd talk about how we named Behind the Next Little Thing. Well, how we named the next little thing.
Yeah, that's right. Behind the Next Little Thing sort of came after that, didn't it? All right. Well, yeah, I think it's very important. Naming a podcast, a lot of people struggle with that.
They do.
Very, very seriously struggle with it, agonize over it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of really bad names out there. You and I comment on it every night on, when we see the news and, you hear them. I forgot her name, but the newscaster has the show called The Dish. The Dish. It's called The Drink.
Yeah, it's actually Kate Snow of NBC News has this podcast called The Drink. And it's supposed to be this sophisticated, talk show, but it's called The Drink. And when I saw that, I'm like, really? That's the message we want to be sending people?
Who wants to join that? So it's obviously not right for the audience on top of everything.
Yeah, I'm really surprised NBC, who I think is involved in that one, because they certainly promote the heck out of it, chose that name. Anyway, that's a really good high profile example of a bad choice for a name.
Right. So you want the name to resonate with the audience. So when we were thinking about this, so here's how the story goes. I was basically reading an article in Wired magazine, which I do pretty regularly. I'm reading this article, and one of the sentences in the article said, what if the next big thing was a little thing? And I thought, wow, that's a great name, The Next Little Thing. And I tell it to you and you go, that's great, but we have to screen it by our criteria.
Right. I mean, I think you're correct on its face. And I saw the light bulb go off, over your head as you're reading Wired, because I think I was sitting next to you as you're reading it. And it was, wow, that's amazing. It's like, okay, well, let's look at it instead of from an emotional perspective, from an objective one.
Right, exactly. So the objective one is clearly, does this name do what we want it to do in terms of what the podcast is going to be about? And will it resonate with the audience? Those are the 2 major things we look at from the beginning. So you and I wanted to talk about products, do a product review style show, because we wanted to test out for our clients the idea of, do product reviews, affiliate marketing, how does that work? Is it really viable? Can you make money? And what are some tactics that work? So as we start a new podcast every year, that's the idea that we wanted to test out this particular year. So it fit the model of next little thing, because we can talk about any kind of products, right? If it's broad enough.
Right. So Tracy, what you're talking about, did it fit the goals that we had set for ourselves for this new podcast? And of course, anybody listening to this is going to need to set their own criteria for if the name that they're coming up with is going to really meet their goals and criteria they set up. So every show is unique in this regard, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is not a one size fits all solution, naming things. It's not. I mean, you and I have named lots of products, lots of colors over the years. And, the choices and the way you make those choices are different. But this in particular, the fit to the audience attraction really matters at the end of the day. So that's the ultimate. So if it fits our goals, the second step of the review process is, does it fit the audience that we want to attract? Is it going to be attractive to them? And we wanted cool hunters and trend hunters and people who were looking for recommendations on products. And does it do it?
Well, and so here, Tracy, is where we're getting into some criteria that I think can apply to every potential podcaster who is naming a new show, who's trying to come up with a name. These things we're going to talk about, every show should try to achieve. And so you hit it right on the head there when you said, is it going to attract the audience that we want? To me, a podcast name has 2 very important goals. And really, in most cases, only these two goals. So the most important things, in my opinion, that a podcast name should do is pique curiosity and get attention. It should just absolutely, somebody reads that name or hears that name, they should be like, oh, what's that about? So it builds anticipation. I mean, I'm adding more things here, it does, but really, I mean, it should make somebody curious to know more about that. What is that? I need to click that. I want to read what that's about, or I just want to go listen, right? Grab your attention, motivate you to click and listen. That's it. Don't be worried about, does it explain what the show's all about? No, that's not what a name of a show is supposed to do. Now, some names inherently within their name, it might be obvious what it's about, but if that happens to happen, then fine. But that's not the job of a name of a show. Grab attention, get me to click and try it.
Right. Just to attract and get you in. Now, we like active names or names that are intriguing from that standpoint, and not just attractive. So like, we kind of like them to do a little bit of heavy lifting on both sides of it. And part of that is this one does it because the normal phrase is the next big thing. And we're saying this is the next little thing. You're like, what's that about? Right.
See, so that's the exact point. You hit it right there, Tracy. I mean, the cliche is, this is the next big thing, right? Or people always talk about, what's the next big thing? Is this the next big thing? This is the next big thing. So when you do something that's counterintuitive and you flip it and you go, the next little thing, that's definitely going to cause people to, because they know the cliche, they know that overused phrase, and that's going to stop and say, whoa, I've heard of what the next big thing is. What's the next little thing? What does that mean? That's going to do exactly what we want. And the show may not be for you. Once you find out what it's about, it may not be for you and you may not become a listener, but I got you to look, didn't I? Or got you to listen. I mean, that's the point.
Right. Absolutely. The other thing is that Tom and I just know from having done this again and again and again that we don't want a name that's too long because you only have so much room on the cover art. We need it to be big enough. So the next little thing is 4 words. We try to keep it, and the is really small. So really it's, 3 words, and that's perfect size. We try to keep it, if you've got like 5, but 2 are tiny, like of the, or something like that, we can do that. But that's about the maximum we try to do.
I mean, definitely, we highly recommend keeping it 5 words or less as an absolute maximum. Definitely discourage people from doing names that are longer than that or that have very long words. I mean, look at the 2 shows over your shoulders, Tracy. Feed Your Brand. Boom. That's pretty clear what it's about in 3 words. And then the binge factor. The is pretty much a throwaway word, like you said. So binge factor. What's that about? I mean, they definitely accomplish the goals we set out for those podcasts. And the next little thing, to me, that fits. And I think it meets our criteria for, what's going to motivate people to click. Now, are there any other criteria, Tracy, that we put all names against that we need to share?
Well, the only last thing we do is we really double check and make sure we can get some kind of URL. So like
of course.
So that's right. We were able to get next little thing pod, which is perfect, nice and short, not too long, but still has the name in it. And pod, it's really common to add pod to the end of things when it's a podcast website. So we were able to get that. That makes it just super ideal and simple. And so that's the only thing we do check. And then we also we have to check Apple, right?
That's the thing I was going to mention. Yes, Tracy, we do. Now, look, Apple is not the arbiter of what you can name your podcast, right? They're not the name police. People often come to us and say, can we lock in that name so that, it's ours and nobody else does it in the time that we're going through the process of launching our show? I'm like, well, it doesn't really work that way. We do research. Apple really is probably the only place I go because everybody puts their show on Apple. Unless you're a new exclusive show on Spotify or something, I guess that's starting to happen. But you can check a couple apps if you want and just make sure, does that name exist? Is there a variation of that name? I don't really think it's a huge problem if somebody has some other derivative or version of the name that I want, as long as the exact same name isn't there.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of times I've seen it where you have the name and one is called the something or other. Another one's called, like, it would be the next little thing podcast, the next little thing with Tom and Tracy. Could be like also like,
Or
I've seen
just
people do it, right?
Or
And it's
next
still
little
same.
thing without the. I mean,
Right.
that, you've seen people do things like that. And I don't think that's helpful. I think that does cause brand confusion. So I certainly do prefer if there's more differentiation in the name from anybody else, especially in the same category or tangent to your subject matter, right?
Absolutely. And now, keep in mind that we did this back when we named our very first show, WTFFF. WTF with Mark Marone was a very popular show. So we did it purposefully because we figured people would be typing WTF, and he was kind of popular among tech geeks. And so that was our audience. So we did it purposefully that when you typed in WTFFF, when you typed in WTF, ours would show below in like a drop list option, and people be like, what is that? And so, we would also show up as an option in there because we were a derivative, but we were a derivative that was longer or in addition to. So WTF was always, getting their credit and showing up first. But we did that purposefully because that was our audience. We wanted to have them find our show, and it worked.
It did work. And Tracy, now you're getting into what can become a rabbit hole that I don't know that we want to go down.
We definitely don't.
But it's important to understand you may have, as you're deciding on the name of your show, you may have some specific reasons for making different decisions that deviating from some of our guidelines, what we would go through with somebody we're working with on their podcast, or you may have a strategic business reason to have a name that's very close to someone else's show. And you know what, if you want to, you can do it. There's certainly nothing that's going to stop you from putting out a name that's very close. And I think we've even seen, I think it's more of a legacy thing. I don't think that these days if Apple would approve a show with no, actually, I'm going to take that back, sort of thinking out loud as I do this. I've even seen the same show be accidentally syndicated to Apple more than once. So Apple wouldn't even stop you from publishing a new show with the identical name to someone else's. So you can do it, but is that a good idea?
And that other show has more authority than you, and it will always show up first. And it will be, especially if they've been there longer and built in a base of listeners and publish regularly. So until they pod fade, you're stuck.
And if they have a registered trademark on their name, which not many people do for their podcasts, but companies do have registered trademarks. And if they named their podcast the same name as their company or the same as the trademark they had, if they have a trademark, then they'll be able to go to Apple and get your show taken down. So it's probably not really in your best interest on multiple levels to go and try to have, publish a show with the same exact name as someone else. Again, there are exceptions to every rule. This is a personal decision or a business decision as to what your name is. We're just letting you know what we think from our experience is in the best interest of a show being seen, found, and heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I just want to leave everybody with before we go is that once you kind of made up your mind and you've screened it through the criteria that you've built and maybe ran it by someone who's in your target audience to make sure it lands the same way, back to our original example of Kate Snow's show, The Drink, if she had run it by someone my age, woman, that's probably her audience. And the two things I think of is like, okay, I'm way too old to just be sitting around drinking and having cocktails and dishing. That's number one. And number two, that might be in the drink. Like, that's what I think of, like golf. Like, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. Like, do you really want your ball in the drink? Like, yeah. So those are the things that occur to me. And you don't know how it's going to land until you ask someone that's your target audience, because you get in your head about your own names and what you've got. You don't necessarily understand how that's perceived. And so brand is always perception. It's something Tom and I talk again and again on all of our shows about. And the name has a perception level to it that you want to check, but don't agonize over it. If you picked a name, you've screened it by someone, you're pretty sure there's a URL and something you're happy with out there, go for it. At that point, just go for it. Those that agonize are the ones who never get their show started.
Yeah, they stay in permanent potential, which is never going to help you or the people that your message is intended to serve. Get it out there, put it out there. If you find later the name, you're just not feeling it and something new occurs to you that's better, you can pivot your name. You can change your name at any time. You got to create a new graphic and change your title, your podcast host. And maybe you got to get a new URL and forward it into the website page where that show exists. I mean, there's a few logistical things, but it's not that painful. We've pivoted our show identity on some of our podcasts multiple times just because, we're feeling, hey, this year, I feel like we should change it up a bit and refresh it. We didn't change the name, but we changed other aspects. But you can change the name. So don't be afraid of it.
Absolutely. So we picked a name, the next little thing.
I like it.
We're on our way and we're down the path of the next things, the next decisions that we have to make.
All right. Well, I look forward to that, Tracy, and look forward to sharing all these decisions as we go through them with all of you. And hopefully this will help you on your podcasting journey to make your own decisions.
If you have any questions or anything that you're looking up or some part of the launching process or some part of the marketing process of your podcast, if you've already got one started, you can go to podetize.com and there's blogs for just about everything. And you can check out Feed Your Brand, Behind the Next Little Thing, and you can link through to the Binge Factor as well. Thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone. This has been Tom and Tracy
on Behind the Next Little Thing.
Want to get even more insider tips, tools, and tactics to create and grow your podcast? Make sure to check out Tracy and Tom Hazzard's other shows about podcasting. Subscribe to Feed Your Brand podcast and the Binge Factor podcast on your favorite listening app or go to podetize.com and let the pros help guide you to an even more successful show.